So I see we have a conglomeration of students, instructors, aspiring instructors, parents, and in that vein, I thought you might really be interested in learning about the fact that all of us here have different learning styles. And I personally have been a student and instructor for most of my life, but I really did not appreciate the fact that myself and all of you and all of my students all have different learning styles. I never really thought about the importance of taking that into consideration. My courses, I was basically teaching the way I was taught as a graduate student and undergraduate student. And I don't think in those days really much consideration was taken into the fact that people had visual learning. What is it? Kinesthetic, oral, visual type learning. I took a test this morning to find out what my learning style is. Found out I'm a visual learner, so I think I probably teach that set of students. Fortunately, I found out that's also the dominant way that people actually do learn well, by reading diagrams and graphs and stuff like that. But the other 40% learn by different methods, so maybe I'm not doing the best job that I can. So I thought, since we're all here as instructors, aspiring instructors, parents, people that want to teach me how to do things in their lives, we would all benefit from learning methods or styles and how we can incorporate them into our classes. So I looked online and I found out we have 2 experts at University of Kentucky. And we're going to actually have 2 speakers today. First is Jennifer Terry, and she works at CELT, and she is the Universal Design, Learning Design Consultant for the University of Kentucky. And I found out that she also gave some workshops that Dr. Brown took and really inspired him to integrate some of the things that he learned at CELT into his courses. And he was so successful that he actually last year won the University of Kentucky Outstanding Teacher Award for his ability to bring some enthusiasm and reach out to all the students in a very successful way. So I hope that you will join me in welcoming these 2 speakers to us today.
All right, thanks everybody. My name is Jennifer Terry, and she said it right, which is incredible. It's very impressive. And I am with CELT, the Center for the Enhancement of Learning and Teaching on campus. And so what we do is we just help professors enhance their teaching, help people find new ways to do things, examine the way they've been doing things, see if there's another way. We keep abreast of all of the new research that's coming out concerning learning science. So we're going to look at UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and I'll continue to just call it UDL because it's way too long of a title. And I hope that you will kind of open up your mind to think about things in a little bit of a different way. So let's get started. So we're going to go through all of these different areas. Where did UDL come from? What is it? Why should instructors use UDL? And then why? How would not how do I? But how would one use UDL? We'll go into a little bit of that. So before I get to the what, I actually took I have like 12 slides in here, and we're not going to have enough time. So I took those out. I'm just going to summarize this part for you. So the where part, where did it come from? Universal Design for Learning is a instructional design framework that was created by a group of education and neuroscience researchers at the Harvard Graduate School for Education. And this particular group got together, and they were really focused on assistive technology, things like screen readers, that kind of stuff, that helps people who may have some kind of a visual impairment or a hearing impairment, helps them be able to participate in the class. And so they started to do some research, and they were implementing some of these different kind of really started to see some interesting things happening with in the classrooms that they were in. And what they saw was that, yes, the students that had the special needs were being helped, but actually the rest of the class was really benefiting as well. And so they really thought, this is really interesting, so they started to look into that even more. And as they did so, they evaluated all kinds of education research, all kinds of research on learning sciences, how the brain works when we're learning. And they came up with this framework that really helps to pinpoint what are some of the barriers that may be in your classroom. And so that's kind of where it came from. And so that group is called CAST, and CAST is in Boston, obviously, but right there by Harvard. It's a great organization. So the first thing we really want to focus on is actually universal design. Universal design is not just an education concept. It's a concept that we see in product design, we see it in building and architecture, things like that. But UDL sort of took those ideas and translated them over into the learning environment. So these are just some of the principles of universal design itself. So this is minus the learning, right? This is just universal design. And a lot of these are things that you all would recognize, right? So things like the automatic doors at the grocery store. Those were really not designed for people who have no problem walking. They were designed for people who are in wheelchairs and who are maybe using walkers or a cane or something of that nature, right? However, today, they're really beneficial to all of us. I know when I was a little bit younger and I had two very small children, like a toddler and a baby, it's really hard to push a cart out of the grocery store and open the door when you have a toddler and a baby and a cart full of things, right? So now I have benefited from something that was put in place for someone else, which is pretty great. So these are just some of the basic principles of universal design. And we actually have a universal design, it's an undergraduate certificate here on campus. So this is another concrete example. You'll have to forgive the terrible pun, but another concrete example of universal design. So this is curb cutout. So who were these originally created for? It's not your question. You can just shout it out. Yeah, people in wheelchairs, right? And of course, who uses these today? Really, everybody does, right? Yeah, so people with strollers, old folks walking with a walker, one of those little rollator things, or sometimes when I have my laptop bag, it rolls. I'm rolling up those things as well. Kids on bikes, a lot of us do. So even though it was put in place for one specific group of people who actually needed it, it's become very helpful for a lot of us. The closed captioning, who was that designed for?
Hearing impaired.
Right, obviously people who are hearing impaired. And who else uses this today? Yeah, a lot of us do, actually. And in fact, someone did a study on this. In 2006, they determined that 80% of people who use closed captioning are not deaf or hearing impaired. So this one thing that was created for a specific group of people, when given to everybody and made available to everyone, is actually really beneficial. I mean, I know I use it at the gym sometimes. I use it when I'm looking at Facebook, trying to go to sleep, and my husband's already asleep, and I don't want the videos to pop, you know. So like we use this all the time. So we can take those same ideas and translate those over into the realm of education and learning. And what we're really looking at with UDL is learner variability, right? We all know, hopefully we all know that we don't all learn in the same way. The way I learn is not the same way that you learn, and vice versa. So UDL, it's this giant chart, and I'm going to show you a picture of it in a little bit, but it's broken down into these three categories. So one is the learning environment, and they talk about that being engagement. The instruction, so that's the actual like delivering of content, they refer to that as representation. And then sort of the assessment part, so testing, quizzes, that kind of thing, and the practicing of what we do, what we teach. That's called action and expression. So whenever you're designing, what UDL would ask you to do is that the instructor should assume they'll have a variety of learners with a variety of needs. I mean, there's no possible way that this particular group would all learn the same way and all have the same learning needs. It's just not possible. So I know that. So if I know that going into my planning for my instruction, then I should probably make some changes to make those things work for everyone. So this is an analogy which I think it really helps to sort of bring it together. So we're going to pretend like I am going to have a lovely dinner party. And I've got this great recipe for Mexican lasagna. And I love this recipe. It's so good. My kids love it. And we're going to use this. This is what we're going to have for our my dinner party. So I send out my pretend invitations to all of my friends and say, hey, we're going to have a dinner party. Come on over. And so then I get a text, rather, from my friend Amy. Amy says, hey, I got your invite for the dinner party. We'd love to come, but I don't know if you remember that we're vegetarian. I'm like, okay, so I'm still going to make the Mexican lasagna. And I said, all right, well, I'll just make I'll just put some to the side and I'll make a vegetarian version for you all. Okay, so now I'm making the lasagna, the regular Mexican lasagna, and I'm making the vegetarian version. And then I get another text from another friend of mine, Janice, who says, are you going to put onions in the Mexican lasagna? Because Jason is allergic to onions. So now I'm making the regular Mexican lasagna. I'm making the vegetarian version. And then I said, I'll just make extra beans and rice for him. Okay, great. So now I'm making 3 different things. And so who else is not going to be able to eat the Mexican lasagna when they come? Well, maybe people who are coming to my party that might have some sensory processing disorder, and they only like a certain texture of food, and that kind of food is not in the Mexican lasagna. People who don't like any of the individual items in the lasagna. People with fine motor impairments, meaning that it's very difficult for them to use a knife and a fork and manipulate things that way. People who don't like spicy food, et cetera, et cetera. This could go on all day. Even my picky 11-year-old daughter, who literally only eats yellow and white carbs. I don't know. That's all she has. I don't know. So that's a lot of people. And I didn't even list all of the reasons that someone may not have some of my Mexican lasagna, right? So this is a new book that just came out earlier in 2008, just 4 or 5 months ago. And one of the things he talks about in this book is this 1-1-1 idea. This is sort of how we've always done accommodations in education, especially in higher ed. So what we do is we get the letter, there's the letter, and we make one change for one student one time, right? So 1-1-1. We make that one change, we do whatever that is that student needs to that particular student, and then everybody else just goes about their business, right? So great, so let's pretend like I've got a student in the fall, and that student's accommodation says that they need large print versions of all documents. Okay, so I'm gonna go make extra copies and I'll do that, and that student, and fine. Then the spring comes around, same course, now I'm teaching a different one in spring, and now I have a student who needs all of the documents to be screen reader accessible. Maybe they're dyslexic, or maybe they have some kind of visual impairment. Okay, so I already spent all that time making the large print versions of the document, but now I need to go back and make sure all of my items are screen reader accessible. So you see how that can like pile up over time, right? I keep having to go back and change the course over and over again to accommodate one person at one time. And that's really just not an efficient way to do things, right? So when we think of the traditional instruction, the traditional way to teach, it's really like our Mexican lasagna. The one-size-fits-all kind of deal. I'm going to teach it in the way that's comfortable for me as the instructor. And if that doesn't work for you, sorry, maybe you're in the wrong degree program. What we call differentiated instruction is really what we're doing whenever we are providing accommodations for students, right? So I'm giving the student, each individual student in the class that needs something different, whatever it is that they need. And that's exhausting and not fun for anyone. So yeah, everybody gets what they need, but that's really overwhelming. You know, if I had all these people coming to my house for this dinner party, and I had to accommodate every individual person's needs, then I'm like a short order cook, right? It's going to take forever, and it's overwhelming. I may not even have a dinner party. So UDL suggests that we do this in a different way. UDL suggests that maybe we look at the different components of what we're trying to teach, how we're teaching them, and we can separate those things out, and we can give students options. So now everybody should be good to go. Who can eat now? Well, now everybody that we listed earlier is able to eat. Even my picky 11-year-old daughter, she's going to probably have some tortilla chips and probably sprinkle some cheese on it. That's sort of how she does. But now all those things are available. So this is kind of looking at them all 3 together. So traditional instruction, sort of the way we've always done it. What we're kind of doing now that we have ADA and compliance and accommodations and things like that. We need one change for one student one time. And then what we're suggesting is that you think about it in a totally different way. Perhaps we give all of the options to all of the people. And then what I actually was making for someone else might be really helpful. So maybe I made some large print documents for all of my students, or for my one student. What if I gave those to everybody? Are there any other kinds of students that could possibly benefit from that? Well, sure. Maybe there are students who really like to take notes, but they want to take them right next to the information, right? Write it on in the margins and do things like that. That might be really helpful for them. It could be helpful for a lot of different people. So when I make those changes, instead of just giving them to one student, I would make those available to everyone. So why should I use UDL? So we know, again, from brain research, that we don't all learn the same way. Everyone learns differently. Everyone, like individually, learns differently. So just like a fingerprint, right? No two brains are alike. And the thing that I think is really interesting is that the same brain can operate differently in different situations with different subjects. So if you, now I don't really know a whole lot about exactly what you all do, but I'm going to assume that probably not all of you could go sit down and play the piano today. Now, some of you probably could, right? But probably not everybody. So if you were in a piano course trying to learn how to play the piano, the way that you're learning is going to be different than you're learning in the field that's most natural to you. So even the same brain will learn differently in different situations. And another idea is neuroplasticity. You know that the brain's able to change the way that it learns. It's able to, the more it does something, and this makes total sense, the more you do something, the more neural pathways are connected there. It makes that sort of widens that highway a little bit so that you can make those things work really well. So again, we come back to these three areas: the engagement, the representation, and the action and expression. And when looking at neuroscience, this is sort of how they break down. So they know that things that happen in that prefrontal cortex, that frontal lobe, are in the blue. That is the things that control sort of how you plan, how you organize, what you decide you need to do first, and prioritize things. That's what that part of the brain does. And the part in the middle, the green part, is the part that is the emotional part. The part is, why should I care about learning this? Like, how are you connecting this to something that's interesting to me? That's really kind of what that part's about. And the recognition networks all around the back, the purple, those are going to be about sort of the way that you teach things, right? Is it all lecture all the time? And that's the only way that they're getting that, the only one of their five senses that you're stimulating is auditory? Maybe. And if that's the case, what students is that creating a barrier for? So what they realize is that whenever we're able to incorporate different ways of teaching, different ways of assessing or testing or whatever, then we are really activating, we can do that in each category, we're activating a large part of the brain all at once, which is obviously better, right? And you learn a lot more, and you learn, you're able to retain the information quite a bit more. And this is all backed up by research. You go on to the CAST website and look up each individual little checkpoint, and I'll get to that in just a second. And it tells you all of this huge amount of research behind it. So how would we use UDL? So this is what the framework looks like. I wouldn't expect you to be able to read that, but it's broken down into those three categories. Again, so we have the engagement, the representation, and the action and expression. And then each of these little parts right here, these are the actual, what we call the guidelines. And so each of those addresses a different part of the category that they're in. So the engagement, that is obviously addressing recruiting interest. How are my students, how am I making them interested in what we're doing? Sustaining effort and persistence, and then self-regulation. So each one of those is a way that we can sort of look at it. And the way I've always liked to use the UDL framework is sort of as a troubleshooting guide or problem-solving framework. And so if I'm having trouble in a class, like a particular group of students, or with maybe a student, like I've given this exam and everyone has missed this particular part, everyone, then, okay, well, obviously something's going wrong with the representation. So I can think, okay, well, what is the problem? Is it that the language and symbols, like, do they not know the prerequisite information to get them to where they would need to be? Maybe that's what it is. Or the way I explained it, maybe that wasn't really the way, the best way for them. Did I give them lots of different ways to perceive the information, perception, right? And so once we kind of know that, then we could break, then we can use the actual bullet points to tell us how to solve that. And I'll show you that in just a moment. So how do we know what our students need? So this is, at SELF, we do mid-semester feedback. So of course, at the end of the semester, you do the TCEs, the teacher evaluations. students fill out for you. But SELF offers the option of people who will come in and actually evaluate students in the middle of the semester and then meet with you about that if you want. It's something that we offer. And so I took all of the data from the past, 4 years, and put it all together and started to code it by which part of learning are students saying that they're struggling the most with? Which part are they saying they need the most help with? And it turns out that the thing they need the most help with is executive function. That's this big chunk right here. And so executive functions, that's the planning part of the brain. That's the part that when you are ADHD, you're missing, or it's very deficient. That's the thing that tells you when it's time to not do something, like when you think about, oh, I'd really like to go jump in that lake, and then you go, no, you can jump in the lake, it's February. That part of your mind is the part that's missing in some folks who have things like ADHD. But it's also the planning portion of the brain. That's where you organize things and where you really figure out what kind of goals you're going to use, how you're going to make things happen, right? So most of our students are saying that the part that they're having the biggest problem with, like in the university, is executive function. They're having a hard time managing their time, figuring out what to study first, figuring out if they should go to a party or if they should study. Those kind of things are really what they're struggling the most with, and we know that from their comments. So if we know that's the deal, then I would use the framework to tell me how to fix that problem. So we know they're having a problem with executive function. How are we going to fix that? Well, we're going to fix that by guiding appropriate goal setting, helping them figure out how to set goals, giving them some ways to do that. Supporting planning and strategy development, that's another way I can help with that. Facilitate managing information and resources, and then helping them to monitor their progress. How are you doing with your grades? Am I getting them things back in a timely manner? I know they want it back like the second that they turn it in, but am I giving it back with enough time that they can use what they figured, like when they can look at their grade and go, wow, I really did not do this part right. Something's not right. I need to check in with my professor on that. Do we give them enough time to do that, or do we turn things back to them whenever, after they'd already taken the exam and it's sort of too late? So thinking about those kinds of things. So here's an example of a way I might help or provide a solution for the problem of executive functioning. So I might estimate some reading time. So I might estimate reading time. So when in the syllabus, while I'm filling that all out, and I've got everybody that you're going to read this chapter here, I'm going to sit down and read it myself and time myself. And then I'm going to multiply that by 1.5. And that's approximately how long it should take students to read it. It's going to take them longer. They're obviously not at the level that you are, and they're also novices as they're still learning how everything works in the field. So I might put that time next to the chapter or the reading assignment. So you're going to read chapter 12. I'm estimating this should take you about 40 minutes to read. And that helps because students are then able to plan ahead, determine how they can build that particular chunk of time into their study for that day or for that week. And so what we're doing is that's helping guide appropriate goal setting. Okay, so they know the goal is they need to get this read before they come back to class next time. And we're helping them do that by giving them some of the tools that they might need. And I'm also supporting the planning and strategy development. This is another example. So we give them the syllabus and it's like 5 pages long. And I honestly, I'm in a doctoral program. I never read the syllabus, you guys. I'm not even gonna lie. Like I'll read parts that are important, but I never read into the rest. So I just don't. And a lot of our students don't either. And so what can be really helpful for students is to sort of cut out the extra gobbledygook. And I know we have to put it in there for legal reasons, but perhaps we can give them a checklist from week to week. And this is not something that we have to continue to do, but it would be helpful maybe at the beginning to show them this is maybe a way that you might want to think about structuring your week. And then as you go through the semester, you can sort of pull that support back just a little bit at a time, a gradual release, and get them to the point where they can make this kind of thing for themselves, if that's helpful for them. So Roger is going to come up and give us all kinds of great examples. And I wish I could claim your love of UDL, but unfortunately it was my predecessor.
I didn't even know I loved UDL.
I know. It's my predecessor, Deb, that was the one that introduced Roger to UDL.
So the first thing I'll say is that not all UDL strategies work for everyone. And I'm an economist, so there is sort of a cost-benefit analysis you'll need to do because lots of times investments in UDL are not zero sum. So you can end up having to put in some more work in certain ways, and you have to judge whether those are going to be worth it to you or the compromises that are inherent in that. So I just went through really quick. I've got 7 of these. I'll just give some real quick examples, and then I want to have you ask, hey, what do I do in this situation, or share your own examples. So all of these examples are structured in this same format. Not all students have paper. Okay, they all have this sort of format. So I had a grad student, and she and I came up with this interesting way to promote discussion in a face-to-face class. It was called 6 Ways to Discuss. And it involved each student. We just had told them, tear a piece of paper into 6 pieces and write your name in one of the 6 ways to discuss. And as you do that, we're going to collect the cards to indicate that you participated or discussed in that particular way. So it all worked great at UK. Sarah Williamson went up to New York City, and I said, how did it go when you tried that? And she's like, it went terribly. The first day, nobody has paper up there. They all carry they walk everywhere, first of all, and they carry everything in their devices. So it's all digitized. They don't carry around paper. So I asked them, and they didn't have it. So I said, well, what did you do? And she said, well, now when I go to class, I just carry my own set of cards. They're all paper clipped, and I pass them out, and they do it, and I collect it that way. So again, that would probably be an example of universal design for learning. People that have paper, people that don't have paper for whatever reason, that's making it more accessible to everyone. Next, not all students have the latest technology. That's true. When I was first designing my first online class in 2008, I realized that not all students had access to high-speed internet. This is College of Ag, and so they live out in the country sometimes. And so I wanted a way to interact directly in a real-time way with all of my students, knowing that some of them could not access the high-speed internet. So I looked online, and I found this thing called Blog Talk Radio. It's probably not relevant anymore because this is probably not as much of an issue. But so Blog Talk Radio allowed me to do a car talk kind of radio show. I did it the night before my exams, from 9 to 10 o'clock, remember, because that's where you had 3 minutes. So you don't want to interrupt where people don't have 3 minutes. This is the old days, folks. This is when people actually still used to talk on the phone. But the way it worked is that I would call into the system using my phone, which is a much more robust and reliable way to transmit audio, even now. And the students would call into the number using their phone, and then I had an online dashboard where I could bring students on and off the show. So I'd be like, hello, this is Roger. Welcome to tonight's show. Sorry we're interfering with the basketball game. And then I would say, now I'm going to bring a caller from the 607 area code. Hello, what's your first name and what's your question? And ask the question. So it was a way, I found out that it was actually such a UDL example that it actually was UDL for me. So I was late getting back home where I thought I'd be able to run my dashboard on the computer at home. I was nervous. My wife and I had just gotten new smartphones. So I was like, honey, we got to drive down the highway and I'm going to run my show. So I grabbed her phone and brought the dashboard up on that. And then I'm talking on my phone, universal design, even for me, making it accessible for me to be able to run my show from my cell phone. Okay, not all students have the latest technology. That's still true. You got to be careful with clickers and stuff. They all sound great, but you got to be careful that some of them have it. Some students learn differently. Jennifer's been talking about that. In my AEC 305 class, I offer it an online version and a face-to-face version. So students can either watch the online lectures and then do online quizzes, or they can choose to do the online lectures and do the in-class discussions. They decide. They call me up and say, I really want this section, I really want that section, and I say, just choose any one of the sections, get one of the spots, and in the first week I'll explain the details, and then you decide if you want to switch sections at that point, and I'll move you. You don't have to worry about it. So I get them into the section that is the one that is going to help them. They watch my video on my plan for success, And then I use that information to help them make a smart decision about which way to learn. Jennifer's talked about not all students learn the same. Next, not all students are brave enough to ask for official accommodations. You know, you can go over to the DRC and get, okay. So, but I realize not all students are brave enough, or maybe for other reasons, to go ask for that. And I thought, what do I do about that? The ones that are brave enough and bold enough to do that, great, they get extra time. I give them extra time, but then I know there's students here that's fiddling and things. You know, I had experience with ADHD and all when I was growing up. My dad was a pediatrician. I think he was experimenting with Ritalin that just came out. But anyway, I realized that, hey, why don't I just give all of my students 2 hours, which would be double time on their exam? I mean, what's the harm in that? I can tell all my students now, look, you don't have to worry about, you know, finishing the exam right away. You'll have time. I feel confident you'll have time. And my thinking, although I didn't tell them, was I want everybody, if these people get 2 hours to take a 1 hour exam, I think everybody should get 2 hours to take a 1 hour exam. So you have to plan this ahead of time because you can't do it in your regular classroom because somebody else is coming in at the next hour. So I scheduled all my exams in the evening in the C auditorium so that I could do that. The irony is that for the students that do have accommodations in double time, now they have 4 hours, and they have to book it for 4 hours over the DRC, but no one ever spends 4 hours on my exams. Okay, next, not all students can afford the required course materials. When I learned this a long time ago, when I first did my first teaching, was in Tuskegee. I lived in Tuskegee for a while. And the little community college was down the road, and I was like, well, I just got here, I don't have a job, so I walked down there, I was like, do you guys need an adjunct, somebody to teach? And my undergrad degree's in English, and they said, yes, we have 2 classes you can teach. It was in an old converted hotel. I was like, great, what textbooks have you been using? And the guy was like, you don't need textbooks because the students will not be able to afford them. And I was like, well, what about this? It's a copy machine. He's like, don't use that unless you absolutely have to. So I grew up learning a lot about religion. I studied religion, some things when I was at Davidson College, but I'm not a religious type of person in that way. But I realize I'm in Tuskegee, Alabama. I know that everyone has copies of all sorts of versions of the Bible. And I'm teaching an English class, so I end up teaching paraphrase by having them compare different versions. I had them compare the flood narrative to the letters that Paul wrote to Corinthians and Romans and so forth, and different narrative styles. I had to always redirect the students. It's not a religion class, but it turned out to work out just fine, and all the students I knew could afford the text, and that was because not all students can afford the required course materials. Okay, 2 more real quick. Not all students will lie about their reasons for missing an exam. This is another one of those things. So, you know, if it's a university excuse absence, you've got to give them a makeup opportunity, and people would come in, and I just can't, you know, I don't have enough time to check into everybody's excuses, and even if you do, that you can't find out for sure. And so some students, I just had this suspicion, I don't know for sure, but, you know, you've been there. And I'm like, I think that that's probably not really the truth. Yet somebody else would come in and be like, I missed the exam, I guess I get a 0. I'm like, are you sure you weren't sick? And they're like, I wasn't sick. I was like, okay. All right. So I got to figure out something else. Because, I mean, out of fairness, you know, there's different learning styles, but now there's different, you know, ethical approaches to learning too. And so now I tell all my students, it's on the syllabus. Any student may elect for any reason to take any exam during the designated time during dead week. So I'll put that in the syllabus. If you miss an exam for any reason, I don't care what it is, then you are electing automatically to take it during that designated time. And if you miss it that time, then you might get an I because I might not have time to make it up. Again, you have to plan this ahead of time. I do try to accommodate additional optional makeup times before then, so that everybody's not, you know, guaranteed to take it at such a late date. But again, I try to find ways to accommodate students, and it turns out all students, they say, well, that's you know, Roger Brown is so nice. He like works with you with your schedule, and okay. I got one more. Not all students can get to your office, obviously. So real simple example. I tell students, if you're in my office face-to-face during office hours, you have priority. The second person that has priority is the person that phone calls me, and the third person is somebody who emails me during my office hours. And so people call, and I'm like, hello, I've got somebody in here. I'll call you back, okay? And then if you know, you can prioritize things in that way. And again, I think students appreciate, that's an example of differentiated learning. I'm doing the, you know, all the hard work where you divide up the lasagna and the beans and the rice and stuff. But, okay, those are just some quick examples that I find maybe are examples of universal design for learning. Jennifer has lots of other ones, and I'm sure when you start to think about it, you actually are doing a lot of things too to make your classes more accessible to more people. You just didn't even know it. It's like the guy who learns about prose, and he's like, I've been speaking prose all my life, and I didn't even know it. Okay. All right, yes, right here.
I have two questions. I want to hear about your discussion starter thing, but I have a student who has an accommodation. And one of those is that they do not do well on fill in the blank or recall kinds of, where, you know, it's like, give me the scientific name of blank. So what do I do with that one compared to all the others? I mean,
In a discussion or on an exam?
on the exam, and the discussion one is like free for nothing. What's that?
You give them a word bank with lots of words that would have been.
It could be. We just given the first test, and so I mean, he didn't flunk it, but yet there's some times where you know he knows it, you know, but it's like I can't come up with the word.
Yes, there's tons of students that have.
It's a combat veteran. It's a combat veteran
Yes,
too.
that would be one as well. And then student anxiety, student processing disorders of any kind, that could be an issue. And so I think there's lots of ways that you could do that, but the simplest way would be to give that student a word bank and input the words that are the correct answers mingled in with lots of words that are not the right. It's like a really big
Multiple choice. Now,
So,
was that you would do it for everybody to be fair? All right.
I mean, and if you're a student, let's say that your student is dyslexic and you are really self-conscious about the way that you spell, this is not good. You got those now. You got the word bank. Now I don't have any self-conscious, and I'll be a little bit more confident when I'm taking my exam. So I mean, it would be helpful.
Tell me about the discussion starter thing.
Oh, that may be something for another time, but it's just 6 ways to discuss, and I write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I have them write on each individual paper 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One of the numbers indicating, you know, answer a question, ask a question, respond to someone else, give an example, so forth. And then as they write their name on the piece of paper, and as they engage in that particular one of 6 ways to discuss, and I walk over and pick that particular card. They know that they participated. I know they did. I have their name. I'm learning the names and all this. It's also, Lisa Pickering is over in the DRC. If I got that, which I've never had, I would first of all call her and say, what am I supposed to do? And she's very good at being able to provide some guidance about how to handle specific cases that provide UDL approaches and so forth.
They want you to ask them how to do things.
Okay, other ways to discuss, ask a question, give an example, what else? For me. Everybody's thinking really hard.
Well, I've got one I'll share. So not everybody wants to talk out loud. People who might be English language learners aren't necessarily as comfortable with the language. I am sort of a closet introvert, and so like I don't really like to share out loud either. But I'll write something, or I might post it if there's a Twitter feed. I would do that. So one thing you can do is what I call a silent conversation, and you just use a poster board or poster paper or whatever, and you would have each student the different color marker, and they would write their name with the color marker somewhere on the paper. And then you would have a prompt in the middle of whatever your question was, and they could write their answers and respond to each other's answers right there on the paper. And so when you go back to look at it and grade it, now this would obviously not work with 400 person lecture all class, but when you go back to grade it, then you can see all red answers belong to Jimmy and all blue answers belong to this person, so you can see how much they participated. And I think if you're having trouble in discussions, people are not wanting to participate, it's usually not that they don't want to participate in class, it's the way that they are being asked to participate it is not what's natural to them. What other questions do you all have about it? UDL is enormously huge. It's a huge, huge topic. And I do want to throw this out, and I don't know why I'm in there, but the best thing that you can do is to really think about your course objectives and your goals of what your assignment is. So my goal is that students will have learned this chunk of vocabulary words or whatever. Then is the only way to find out if they can do that by a test? Like, are there other possible ways they could do that? Could they do? I mean, could it be an oral exam? Could you do it that way? Maybe. So I like to try to think about what's the goal, and is there any other possible way that they could show you than the goal, than the way that you've been already doing? Obviously, university setting is going to be text heavy because it is, but then I've always heard that 1 in 5 people has some kind of a text disability. It could be reading disability, it could be an attentional focus type thing. 1 in 5 is a lot. And we know that 1 in 10 students has some kind of a disability. And when a lot of students come to college, up until college, let me start here. In K-12, they get the accommodations whether they want them or not. Like if they've gone and sat down with people and had a meeting, those things are just delivered to them. So the teacher comes and gets them out of class, and they go and work on whatever, and then they come back. Those accommodations are just given. When you come to college, you have to take all of your paperwork from your doctors, whoever has given you a diagnosis of some kind, psychiatrist, whatever. Take all of that physically to the DRC, to fill your resource center, hand them those things, and then they will give you your accommodation letter, which you then have to go and hand to your professor. So yes, we want them to learn how to ask for help, but that's a really big shift. And when you're entering a university with people who you maybe already think are smarter than you, I can understand why a lot of students don't self-identify when they come to college. So we know we have those kids in our classes. What can we be doing to maybe to give them the scaffolding and the support that they need to really show what they can do and show what they know? What other questions do we have?
Okay, so I'll ask one about scaffolding or talking about process to students. So maybe think about it too much, but we all have in our classes an objective for how much information, how much ideas they need to confront in that class. But as you add discussions over process and planning, so then that limits the class time on terms of idea discussion. How do I move that time for ideas to the students and get them to work on that on their own when they might not want to?
What I've heard from a lot of instructors is that when they start, I could be wrong. So you're asking about like embedding some of those strategies in the class. So like giving them the breakdown for reading and saying you got to read a whole chapter. You might want to read 7 pages this day, 7 pages this day. Are you talking about like building those things in?
Sure.
Okay, so if that's what you're doing, instructors that have done that, it is going to be a little heavy on the front end, but it saves you a ton of time because you're not having to reteach and have students that don't turn in assignments and things like that. So it really does end up and it doesn't sound like it would end up being helpful, but it is. It really is. And if the goal of being a teacher is to teach and to have students retain information, then that's the goal. You know, I mean, so if we want to be able to give them that information and help them to learn how to process it, these are going to be your future colleagues. You know, I mean, you want to do it right. So if that's what it takes, if it takes a little extra work at the beginning to get them to the point at the end where they now have a new skill that can be transitioned to other courses, I think that's a thing.
I think of we have this breakdown. Do you teach online or do you know? I don't teach online, and I think anymore this is a continuum, and we ought to really be thinking, all of us, about web-assisted courses. And there are probably things in your courses now that can be put online, and you can actually put them online, and that's useful to students. That's where they're more and more naturally looking for those things, and that can free up time in the rest of your class. So I have I put the video of, you know, for first day of class, this is the syllabus, this is the plan for success. I have all of those. I put all those videos together and put them online. And that frees up time for me to have more relaxed discussion with students in class. So I think that's, it's a little more of an ambitious approach, but I think it's also really a rewarding one, and I think it's more and more just the way people are going to be thinking about it, whether you want to think of your class as online or not. All courses, I think, are headed towards being web assisted, and students' expectations will follow with that. One thing I realized when I started creating more and more content and delivering it online is I realized just how unorganized my face-to-face class really was. It's the easiest way to think about it is that you do not want your students trying to spend time figuring out your course. You want them to spend time figuring out and understanding and learning the content. And I think I'll just say this, if you've not developed online materials or developed an online course, just trust me, when you get to that point, you will discover what, you'll remember back to this point and you'll say, Roger was right. I can't believe how unorganized my course was before and how my students must have spent so much time trying to figure out where everything was and how it was organized and how it worked.
An example of that?
So I'm in an online doctoral program at the moment, and I took a class where I literally spent 30 minutes one time looking for an assignment on in the website for the course. And this was a regular thing, like things were all over the place, and it was really disorganized. It was exhausting to do that and have to go through that process. And then she would refer to something else. You want to go find this somewhere, and I would go look for whatever the words were that she said. And then like she had it somewhere else, but the words would be different words. And I'm like, what? So when it's really like disorganized, it's
You never talked about the problems that students have with executive function, planning, strategizing. We tend to think, oh, all the students are going to be in class. I'm just going to tell them, you know, guys, the exam, we're not caught up with the material, so I'm moving the exam from Tuesday to Thursday. That is an enormous disruption for people who already have issues with executive function, planning, and strategizing. And you can't do that in an online class. In an online class, your exam dates need to be in the course description when they register for the course. And so you're forced to get it right and know how long it takes. And that means you're going to have to practice your lectures and make sure everything works out. So the time leads up to this is when we have exams. All of that is just that much more effort to benefit all the students with all of the executive functions. Because you're now more organized, you can't be as lazy as you were before. You have to be more organized, and that benefits the students. But you're not forced to do that lots of times if you're not delivering more content online. Oh, yes.
I was wondering if you have any suggestions for students who go into the course saying, I just want to pass. And that means like, how do you get them to overcome that aspiration or no aspiration? Bring them to desire to excel.
So the question is, what do you do with a student that just is trying to get by with a D means diploma, and they come there at the very beginning of your class? How do you motivate those students to aspire to more things?
So if that's the problem, just sort of look real quick at the bolded part of each one of these, and does that apply to any of those? Like, which one of those is the problem that she's describing?
Something that might be executive function.
It could be.
They're more interested in the college life, not including the academic.
I'm thinking about that Shrek movie. Me.
Do you want to answer the
Well, is it the one up in the top left?
Yeah, so recruiting interest is really important. We think as professionals that students will make the connections between what we're teaching them and what they're going to be doing in their future, but they don't. Like, I was just going to tell you, they don't. we have to make those things explicit for them, which feels kind of awkward to us, but it's really important because this is a random example, but I was a music major and other majors, but I was also a music major. And I took a music history course, which was the bane of my existence. And I had to learn all these things down to this minutia information. And just tons of memorization, which I also hate. And so, I was frustrated with it, and I was talking to my TA, and the TA said, well, you sing opera, right? And I was like, well, yeah. And he goes, so when you're standing on the Met stage auditioning, and someone asks you if you sang any roles from any Mozart opera, and you name an opera that is not a Mozart opera, don't you think you're going to look like an idiot? And I was like, maybe. I was like, that's why we learn this stuff, so that you understand how. So they made that connection for me. And I did a little bit better in that class than I would have done before. But it really gave me more of, now I get it. Now I get why we have to do this.
One approach that I've heard is that you ask students at the beginning of the class, why are you taking this class and what things do you want to learn? And then you have in your class a couple of days that, or maybe towards the end, and those are the days that you say, there's nothing there. We're going to cover the things you tell me at the beginning that you want to learn during those days. So that gives them excited about, at least there's something in the class that they got to pick. I ask my students who attend the face-to-face version of my class, and I say, why did you pick the face-to-face? What do you want out of this? And I'm always surprised that, they tell me different things than what I thought. And they say, well, I really want to be able to ask hard questions, and I want to be able to get off topic if we can, and so to cover their interests. And I think that gets them involved and invested in. They at least feel like I care why they're there, and then I just sort of teach the same stuff that I was always. But they think that they have a big role to play.
And one of the things that people sort of associate with UDL a lot is choice, student choice. So if you can give them a choice on any part of the assignment, great. You can give them a choice on any part of what it is that they need to study, good. If you can find a podcast that makes sense with whatever it is that you have to be studying, say, hey guys, you can either read the chapter, you can listen to the podcast, but I'm going to be testing you over following main concepts. So either way, anything you can give them a choice about. Here are 5 essays for the exam. I'm going to let you choose 2 of those. Yeah. Or I'm going to choose 2 of those, so that way they're preparing, but you're giving them options for choosing things, and when they can choose things. There's research behind this that says that they will be more invested and more engaged if they're doing this.
So Jennifer is a resource in self. There's email and office hours and all of that, so you can I encourage you, if you're interested in more of these things, to contact her. She's the expert. If you want to contact me, I don't think I'm an expert, but I try to do the best I can. So I'm happy to talk about this, or 6 ways to discuss, or any of those things. And thank you. It was a pleasure to spend your very end of the week, Friday afternoon, talking about these things. So thank you all very much.